So yes, thank you very much, and I'm very sorry that I cannot be there and meet in person with you, and I'm also sorry that I cannot give a proper talk in German. I will be pleased to be able to. And as you say, my historical background is more anchored on sensory motor perception. First, really motor coordination, and then sensory motor coordination, and then more spatial representation, spatial cognition, with interest for pathologies such as spatial neglect. And I have always been interested in strategies to boost brain plasticity and use the sensory motor interactions to try to boost plasticity and try to design applications for patients in terms of rehabilitation. And what I'm going to present here is less motor, but still a bit motor, and maybe still sensory motor, and also aimed at trying to act as using a bottom-up strategy to try to act on cognitive levels, pretty much as Piaget has described intelligence to arise from sensory motor interactions of the children, but trying to apply this not only to children, but also to adults, especially for rehabilitation. So I will focus here on learning from illusions about the reality, but the reality of others' perspectives. So how much can we get into the other's shoes by using illusions? We always have this kind of intimate experience here of misunderstanding, which is a basic daily experience in terms of communication, in terms of perception, in terms of interpretation of the world. And my real goal is to try to see how we can improve these mismatch and prevent conflicts from there. It's very big aim, ambitious. This is just to describe the Lyon Neuroscience Research Center. There are 18 teams that have been classified this way, and our team, Trajectoire, is the more cognitive and the more patient-oriented team in the center. Others can be very molecular level or the basic level. And our approach in this team is to have what we call a patient-centered project. And we are interested in space representation, motor control, and communication. And so we have different subgroups, and people may belong to several groups interested in how we interpret 3D space, how we interact and coordinate perception with action, or how we can improve patients with motor deficit. And in terms of interactions, we have a group working specifically in coma patients, trying to restore communication with these patients. And another one working at improving other oriented skills, which is much more what I will be focusing on. So our main questions are, how can we reduce motor handicap? How can we reduce misperception? How can we improve communication? And we try to move from patients to workbench and back, instead of simply doing basic science and then trying to see how and if we can apply this to patients. We try to really start from the patient needs and design our research from these needs before we go back to the patient in terms of rehabilitation and diagnosis. So I'm going to talk about perspective taking, and I really like this image because it is a very nice question about perspective taking, very sad and very funny at the same time. And it talks about a spatial perspective, but also very much about emotional level of perspective taking and cognitive levels of perspective taking. And I just want to remind you, and I'm sorry for giving a very broad introduction for those who are very familiar with these topics, but just to try to classify several domains of alterity, how we may perceive others. There is the cognitive dimension of understanding, thinking, Then there is the emotional dimension, which is often referred to as empathy, and the physical dimension that we can call point of view or spatial perspective taking sometimes, and for which the perception of space may depend on our spatial relationship with the objects that we see, which is particularly remarkable with these Japanese masks, for example, who are constructed to change expression depending on the angle that they are presenting. And so the cognitive dimension is often referred to as the theory of mind, beliefs, judgments, what we try to infer in the other person's mind. In terms of the emotional dimension, there are, of course, the emotions, but also behind the emotions and feeling, you may refer to the need of the person and the mood, of course. And then in the physical dimension, there is the spatial perspective taking, and also the physical constraints that other people can have. And this is particularly relevant in terms of rehabilitation, of course. So if we have these three domains of perspective taking, one may wonder if there is actually one central module of perspective taking that has several domains of application. Sorry, I left this slide in French, but emotional can be get like spatial, cognitive, and emotional. One may wonder whether we have a common module for taking perspective or whether we have several modules, and whether acting on one level can produce action on the other levels. So what we're interested in is how this question of perspective taking refers to a common mechanism, and whereas the specific ability to take perspective in one domain are related to the other and can therefore be used to try to act on other levels. And being historically biased, as I mentioned, by the sensory motor interactions, I will of course show you how much I believe that spatial perspective taking is a cue to enter and to produce effect into the other domains. So in our group, the group that is specifically involved in communication has a project on coma and post-coma patients, trying to develop other-oriented fields and try to design or evaluate interventions using ambiguous subjects and illusions, viewpoint training, or non-violent communication. And so, for example, we have a task where we ask people to take the perspective of other people, try to task where you have objects that can be seen from different perspectives and they are seen differently, like is this apple red or green, depending on where you see it from, and specific projects as well, applying to only this specific question about what may be common to all these different tasks involved in perspective taking. I forgot to say, but I really love to be interrupted when I give talks, because it gives me, especially being at distance like this, it gives me more feeling of being present and being interactive, and this is much livelier, and I really enjoy this. So please feel completely free to interrupt me anytime. Comments, questions, precisions, contradictions, whatever. Maybe sometime I'll say, okay, I refer to this later, but that anyway, I will be pleased to get any questions. Any questions so far? Okay, so the great aim is to see how we can see the world beyond one's own perspective. And this is applicable in the general domain, because we all have our own way to see the world, and it's always difficult to see how much and how far we can get into the capacity to have access to other people's view of the world. And this is also very important for one domain of my activity, which is medical activity, because there are lots of issues about the empathy of doctors and how much empathy is good or not for doctor to have. There is also the issue about whether medical students lose empathy during their studies and whether it is a good idea to boost empathy in the students. So this is a really important question for care. So my talk will address a few issues, I don't know how many, 2, 3 or 4, about the pleasure of illusions. Of course, we all know about the pleasure to be tricked. We know the pleasure to understand when illusions can be used to explore the way perception is exploring and decoding sensory signals. But we can go beyond this and explore whether illusions can be used to fight against prejudice and to develop openness to others. This is what I will get to. So you all know that the world is very complex to code or to decode, depending on the vocabulary people are using, because we are facing very sophisticated sensory signals, and it's of course much more easy to depict them visually in slides than auditory or somatosensorily. But we have to extract many types of information from complex visual scenes. And some of the parameters that we have to extract may interfere or be dependent one upon each other, like size and depth, or colors and light are interdependent. And extraction of contour is very sophisticated as well. And our brain has been designed by segregating the decoding of these different aspects of the visual scenes by having many different visual areas. And these visual areas are more or less, and it's really more or less, so I mean, we often see the caricature that each area is specialized, but I don't believe this is true. But some areas are somehow specialized for analyzing specific features of our environment, and then we still don't know how to put this together into a common representation of the world and how we get conscious access to the external world, given that our brain is analyzing the shape in one area, the color somewhere else, and the motion somewhere else, etc., etc. So if we start with a bit of visual illusions, one of the most classical, the coffee wall illusion from Oxford, that was made popular by Richard Gregory. What is striking with illusions is that sometimes you find yourself into facing two conflicting interpretations of the world. There is something in your brain that tells you in front of this image that the lines are parallel. And there is something that tells you that the lines are really not parallel. And it's really difficult to make the final decision about whether or not they are parallel, because your intuitive perception tells you it is not parallel, but when you really think about it and analyze lines, then you may decide they are really parallel. And there are other illusions where you, even if you make efforts to analyze the image, it's really difficult to not see the illusions. For example, this image from Kitaoka. I'm sorry if you all know this, but if you don't know it, it's really interesting that in this image you may see a yellow moon behind the shadow, the clouds, and here a blue moon behind the clouds. But if you pay attention to these two round dots, they are exactly the same. And the interpretation of the color that you give of these internal circles only depends on the surrounding. So if I remove the surrounding, you actually see that the two circles are exactly identical. And if I put them back, again, you see a yellow moon and then a blue moon. And as another recent example of illusions, I like this one of the expanding hole, where you can see that this black hole is progressively increasing in the screen, even though I'm not manipulating anything and the image is completely static. And then I want to insist on one feature of our perception, is that there are things that we see and things that we don't see. If you're not familiar with this image, how many circles do you see in this image?
I see many.
Oh, I never counted them actually. Yes, 16, okay. So you all know this image already? So
are you sure?
You see rectangles here because your brain is trying to make a three-dimensional interpretation of this image, and they look like the frame of the painting, for example. But if you pay attention to what is in between each frame, then you see circles everywhere. You somehow have to forget about the automatic 3D interpretation of the image to be able to see the circles. It's just like when you go to a magical show. I mean, you really want to know how they do it, but once you know it, it's very frustrating because you don't have the pleasure anymore. That's so then you have to share the pleasure with other people, show the illusion to other people to keep pleasure going on. Do you know this image here? No? Okay, so in the middle of this image, there is something that you should see, but that you probably don't see if you don't know the image. So probably you may see a little stone in between the breaks of the image. Do you all see this tiny stone between the breaks? Yeah. In fact, there is no stone in between the bricks. And this is belonging to another object. I give you a few seconds just to increase the pleasure of discovering the real interpretation of the image afterwards. Yes? Yes, Walter? So there is a cigar stick between the bricks of the wall. Who can see the cigar? For those who may not see the cigar, here is it outlined. And I'll give you the image back now. So what is nice with this image is that, I mean, it's funny that we don't see the cigar when you see this image in the first place. But imagine we belong to a society where it is usual to stick your cigarette or your cigar in between the bricks of the walls surrounding you. You would immediately see this from the first sight. So it really shows that our visual experience is highly dependent on our historical perception or the history of our perceptual system. Well, anyway, after this very brief introduction about a few visual illusions as starters or appetizers, I really like this sentence from Edwin Boring, which is about the concept of illusion and arguing that illusion, the concept itself of illusion is nonsense because we never actually see reality. So why bother talking about illusion when we are never able to capture reality? So now, if I one ingredient to my talk is coming from Germany, and this nice paper by Earle, Reder, and Topolinski, who studied perception of illusory contours and basic illusory contours, not this funny one made with kiwis. And they showed that if you ask people in a very boring lab experiment to see these illusory triangles, the classic ones, Canizza triangles, and if you ask them to rate the pleasure they enjoy or they feel looking at the object, how much this object feels good or not, they show that showing an illusory triangle gives more pleasure to the people who is watching the image than a regular triangle. And this is kind of interesting because it shows that the brain has pleasure finding the task a bit complicated, even though this pleasure is not proportional to the difficulty of the task. It's not a pleasure for difficulty, it's a pleasure for the kind of magic that we experience when you see this kind of image. I really love to illustrate this effect by this image, because every time I show this image, I see the people looking at the image smiling. And I think we smile in face of this image because we really can feel these two conflicting interpretations in our brain. Somehow our brain completing the form completion algorithms are telling us that this is one animal. And at the same time, we see two heads and we know this can't be in one animal. So we have these two things and this make us smile in front of such image. And I think it's a nice experience to demonstrate that experiencing the magic of the tricks that are used by our brain to decode the brain, to decode the visual world or the sensory world, can give us some pleasure. And of course, I would also like to say that, of course, when you see these kind of images, in general, the argument is our brain is fooling you. Your brain is fooling you, as journalists say. In fact, it's not. It's just that our brain is using the most probable interpretation of the world. And if it was not able to extract the most probable interpretation of the world, like here, you would not see a tiger. And if you're not able to see a tiger here, there would be no human left on Earth. So our brain is not fooling us at all, but instead is helping us to survive. And to survive, you have to extract forms, contours, even though there may be obstacles in the middle. And if you believe that these are only pieces of tigers and this is no danger, you can approach and eat some meat, then you're wrong. Okay? Right. So illusions, you can see them from many, many different ways, and they can be found in arts, they can be found in science, they can be found in everyday illustrations. And now that we have Facebook, YouTube, etc., they are made very popular, and you can find many versions of illusions, and they have been fascinating humans for a long time. And Dali is one expert of drawing these kind of striking illusions. Asia, of course, was one. And my argument that I will start to build now is that using illusions is really good way to challenge our way we perceive reality and to kind of take some distance with our perception. One most spectacular illusion is this one. Why it doesn't work now? Ah, yes, okay. Does everyone know this illusion? No? If you know, I skip, otherwise I keep it. So the two dots that you see at the center here and here are perfectly synchronized. They are becoming white together and they are black at the same time. But of course, you see them as completely asynchronous, or you may even see them in phase opposition. So I have to remove the background so that you can realize that they are actually synchronized, and then put the background back, and you see that they are again in phase opposition. This is a really fantastic way to show that not only visual illusions do affect space perception, but they can affect time perception or time relationship between things. And I really enjoy showing this to people and to students to show them that you should never believe your perception. You should always make sure of what you perceive and check several times before you assert what you believe you see is reality. I have spent one day in front of this barrier during vacation, and I took picture of the same thing at different times of the day. And you can see that you never see the same thing. I mean, what enters my retina when I look at this is never the same depending on the time of the day. Nevertheless, I'm fully able to say that this is the same object. Colors are different, shapes are different, shades are different. Everything is different at the same time. The contours may be different. Nevertheless, I can feel that this is the same object. So how much can we have access to reality, and how can we construct reality, even though we may have very different images, different colors, different shapes, depending on where we look at the object? One way to solve the question is to never more talk about facts or objects, but to talk about observations. There are only ways to access reality, and there are no proper reality that we can access. If you ask a physician to describe the concrete that is used to make these pillars, I mean, depending on the size of the microscope, they can show this kind of thing or this kind of object, or if it is electronic microscope, they will get to this. And if you go further down, the physicians will tell you that actually this is made mostly of emptiness, and that there is not so much matter there, and not more matter than in the air surrounding the pillars. So we all only have observations of the world, and given that, we should be very modest about our perception. And it is, I think, exactly what Magritte tried to say when he did this painting, la trahison des images, the betrayal of images. And I discovered that even French people don't really understand this image. I mean, they only find it funny to write, this is not a pipe, just behind a pipe. But in fact, this is not a pipe, this is a representation of a pipe. And we can only access representation of the pipe, and we cannot access the pipes unless you have proper sensory motor interactions in the world. And then you have another interpretation by somatosensory experience of what is a pipe. But this will always be a somatosensory interpretation, and this will always remain an interpretation of the pipe. So we are very used to have faced two-dimensional representation of objects. We have pictures for more than a century. We have movies. We have virtual reality. We have many tools that can allow us to draw objects. And for example, making this numeric image gives you the impression that there is an illusion here. But what does happen when you actually face an object in the real world that has the same property as these illusory objects that you may see in the artificial world or in the artistic world? For example, if you face this object here, so now it's not a numeric image, it's a real object that I have in my hand. This is a real object that is made of wood and that can be presented right in front of you. How does your perception system deal with this? When it's 2D representations, you say, wow, that's really cool, that's really nicely made. But when you face this object, you feel like, shit, there's something going wrong with me. There's something wrong. I cannot understand how this object is made. It's impossible. So how do we face the interaction that is not so much motor sometimes, but at least the sensory? How do we face this interaction with these objects? We may see possible objects like this one, which will turn to be an impossible object, or you can see this impossible object, but you actually can see this object. So how can you make really sense of what, how can you trust what you see? This is a solution about the chair. And for, if you have missed it, I play it again. We sit on that chair. And here is the chair. Nicely made. Unfortunately, they are not on sale. Another kind of chair that is famous is the chair from Gaucher. I don't know if you know this chair. This is the I don't know the word in English, the reduction chair, reducing chair maybe in English. So it looks like a chair, and nevertheless, you can go through the chair. So when you face an experience like this, it's much more compelling, challenging than just seeing a painting by Dali or the drawing by Escher, etc. Because you have somehow to move your way to perceive the world from, this is a chair, obviously, and now you have to say, from my point of view, I perceive a chair. You have to become more modest about your perception, and you have to kind of take ownership for your perception and admit that the perception is not about something outside, but it's about what you perceive. So you take ownership of your way to perceive the world. In my view, the best objects that have been designed for this are objects that have been designed by Kokichi Sugihara from Meiji University in Tokyo. And he's designed several such objects as the one you can see here. So this object can be seen from one side as being a matrix of square, and from the opposite side as a matrix of circles. But then when you switch on the light with the appropriate orientation, you discover that the shadow of the squares are circles, and the shadow of the circles are squares. And this is, again, very compelling and very challenging for your perception. I don't know, I have one object in front of me here. I'll try to put it in front of the camera. For example, here you see squares inside circles, this small object. And if I turn it around in front of you, suddenly you see circles in front of squares instead. So depending on the angle, the shape of the real object is like this. And it's only depending on the angle where you see the object from that you will see squares in circles or circles in squares. You can have single squares, single circles, etc. You can have what you want. This guy is incredible because he has made algorithms, and he can ask his algorithms, I want to make a 3D object. From one side, it has to look like the moon. From the other side, I want it to look like a star. And then the algorithm builds an object that can be seen as a moon or as a star, depending on the point of view. And this is really extraordinary because it shows us that you can have two unique points of view of the objects. None of the 2 points of view gives you a real interpretation of the object. And therefore, it talks about whether points of view are antagonists or complementary. And again, as for the chair, it really teach you to say, this is, from my point of view, I see it as squares, but you have to go away from saying this is independently circles. Okay. So you have to move from perceiving things outside as to being aware of your own perception. Being myself colorblind, I have often made the experience of people telling me, you must be colorblind because I don't see things of the same color, and people kind of being aggressive to me or rejecting me or rejecting my perception. I'm not acknowledging my own perception. But this happens to other people. And some other people can say, oh, that's interesting. You see this green, I see it red. And right from using these kind of objects with two different interpretations and having two persons facing these objects, it is a very nice way to classify people in terms of openness to the point of view of other people. And this is where, I mean, you were asking me earlier about diagnosis, and this is something where I think we can use it for diagnosis, but I haven't played with this yet. No, I mean, you can have an apple that has one red face and one green face. So if you look at it from one side, you say, look at this red apple, but the other one will say, no, it's red, it's green. So the same object, I mean, it's it is the issue of ambiguous objects that can be perceived from different points of view as different objects and give different interpretation. But then the reaction of people can be completely different. Some people may say, you're wrong, I'm right. And some people would say, oh, that's interesting. You don't see it in the same way as myself. This is what I want to point to. Okay? And this is what I also illustrated in the beginning of my talk with this. And the trick is that the brain doesn't like to have several ways to go around the world. It likes to have only one way. So the brain likes to see things in one way, and then once the brain sees things in one way, it is really in difficulty to change his mind and change the way to see the world. So this arrow may be always pointing in the same direction. It's impossible to make it point to the left. But the person on the opposite side may always see this arrow pointing to the left instead, and never see it point to the right. So if we play with this, and well, I have a version of this arrow, but that's no problem. Anyway, my point is that in order to better interact with people, it's worth to give away our geometrical view of the world, like the traditional Renaissance view of Firenze, with this kind of unifocal perspective that is also illustrated recently by many artists. And I think the idea of Picasso, which has been discussed extensively by people who are much more expert on the issue than me, I'm really not an expert. The idea here is that using a multifocal vision provides a fusion of several points of view of the same object. And this combination of several points of view, and usually he did this for women's body or women's face, gives you a more realist view of the world, because you're combining different points of view within the same image. So does the world resemble more to this or to this? If we stick to our unique point of view here and now, of course, this may be more realistic or maybe more fitting to our experience. But if we see the complexity of the real objects, and if we admit that there are many points of view to analyze any object, then Picasso is right. What I find extraordinary with this way is that our interpretations are completely automatic. So I showed you the chair that could be, people could go through the chair before. Now it's the solution. The solution is here. You look through a hole here, and given the optical law of geometry, you have the basement of the chair here, and the sitting part of the chair well beyond and way larger. So the alignment is such that it gives you the impression that the whole thing is a chair. But in fact, this person is 3 meters behind this person. So this is why you see it much smaller. But even though I am showing you the trick here, and now you know the geometrical rules and why your perceptual system is making these two persons of very different size, you cannot prevent yourself from seeing a little one and a big one here. And you cannot prevent yourself from not allowing, you cannot unplug, I don't know how to say, you cannot inactivate the automatic geometrical reconstruction of the world that gives you this false interpretation, even though you know it is not possible that two persons can be so different in size. So the automatic nature of the reconstruction is such that you can see this person here as being very big in front of me here, but then becomes very small in front of someone else. And this is completely automatic. So now, if you really admit that this is an external object, you will always believe that the things are wrong, and you have to really take distance with your own perception, that is taking responsibility for your perception. And when I was talking about introducing doubts in the brain of medical students earlier, I want to insist on one thing. I mean, one way of seeing what I've said so far is to say, this is my point of view, but this is not reality. But this should not undermine your point of view. This is only your point of view, sure, but your point of view is as important as others. Everyone should take responsibility for his own perception, and perception of the world can be enriched by the combination of all these perspectives. So we all access the world through a unique hole, our eyes or our ears, etc. But it is not because we don't see reality that it should undermine our way to perceive the world. It's only a way to reconciliate our way to see the world with others' ways to see the world. This is what I would say, come to. So now, if I come back to this idea of trying to act on one level of perspective taking and see how we can act on the other level indirectly. In terms of illusion, if you look at the history of illusions, one thing that I always found striking is that there are plenty of classifications of illusions, and none of them is satisfactorily. Nobody is happy about their own classification, and they always need to make sub-classification and more and exceptions and so on. Illusions, of course, are used a lot to share the pleasure to be fooled. It's a fantastic tool for teaching, and they are also used as research probes, as I have done many times for the perceptual system, neural network of the brain, try to explore where the brain designed size, contrast, etc., extractions from this. But can illusions be useful for the society in terms of improving relationships between humans? This is another story. And this other story, we can propose 3 steps in this story. One is, as I argued so far, we have the illusion of reality. Our sensory systems do not capture reality, and my reality depends on unconscious inferences, just like von Helmholtz was already advocating more than 100 years ago. Then there is a Copernican revolution of perception, which is that perception is tied to our spatial point of view, as I already also showed you. So this means that my reality depends on where I am now. And there is also the illusion of objectivity, which is our perception is tied to our perceptual history. And this is very nicely illustrated by illusions that depend on the adaptation phenomenon. You can see several of them on Michael Bach's website. And this shows that my reality depends also on who I am. So where I am in space, where I am in time. And if we really realize, but not by teaching moral, but realizing by sensory motor experience, by interacting with the world, by immersion, that my reality depends on all these things, can we see that using this can develop the possibility to be more open to people or to better perceive the point of view of other people? There are a few studies that have addressed this already. For example, there is this nice, again, early Popovinsky study showing that using a money game and the visual-spatial perspective taking task, they have used tasks where you have to decide whether you play with this person, and you have to decide whether you are at the place of this person or facing this person. And then you have to give this object or give this object. So use your right hand if you are from this side or from the other side, etc. And then they made people play with this game, and they explored how much you trust the person after the game. And they have explored several other variables. What they have shown, as many other people, is that your reaction time to answer depends on the angle between you and the person facing you. That is, the avatar on the picture in the previous image was 116, which is you have to go all the way around to take its position. So it means that taking the spatial perspective of another person requires sensory motor simulation of you moving around to really put your place in the place of the other person. And the more the person is away from you in terms of angle, the longer it will take for you to take his perspective. And when you do this game, they show that people who are trained to take the perspective of the other people, like this, especially, we report more trusting the other person that is in front of them afterwards. They also will trust them better in terms of betting games. It is a classic game that where you can test how people trust the behavior of other people. And they also report that they like the person better after they have been playing with taking their physical position just for the necessity of playing the game. Not in terms of emotionally or whatever. It's just being trained to take the perspective of another person can increase the possibility, the probability that you like the person in self-rating, self-reported liking. This is a nice result already. And another very nice study was made by a colleague from Kyoto, whose name is Ayumi Kambara, who used visual illusions from Kitaoka, for those who know. So you have these illusions here with a real version of the illusions where you can see motions, for example, you see waves. And then you have control versions that are flat, boring versions of similar to the experimental stimuli. And what they did is simply to expose subjects to either type of illusion or control illusion, no illusion. And then they explored the way people attributed social biases to other people. That is, when people make a decision, we all know that we have classic cognitive biases that we tend to attribute stronger to other person to ourselves. This is what you see here. So people perceive that the decision of others is strongly affected by social biases, social judgments, whereas their own is less. So we always believe that our decisions are more rational than decisions of others. But after being exposed to these illusions passively without any reference to social judgments and so on, they found that people exposed to illusions see their self-bias rating increase and the other self-bias non-significantly reduced, but still reduced a little bit. So it shows that being exposed to these visual illusions and the doubt that is generated by this kind of illusions may be sufficient to introduce a little bit of doubt about the self-confidence that you have in yourself, and maybe also to improve the confidence that you can have in other people. So now again, well, how about if we play with this with 3D stimuli, with these figures that I find are much more compelling than these 2D images that we see everywhere, and use instead these 3D objects that I made in the lab and that are much more compelling. So 3 steps here. The first thing I want to show you is remind you about this one of the first movie of the Lumiere brothers, who were originated from Lyon. When this movie was first shown in the room in 19, I don't remember now, 60 something or 70 or 80 something, people in the room escaped because it was the first time ever that they would see a moving object that was not a real object. They completely escaped from the room. They ran away, especially the people in the first front rows, they ran away from the room as soon as the movie started. And I find this really incredible. Now you can see all these children in front of TV, movies, they see the most striking creatures and most striking objects moving in front of them, and they don't move at all. We use 3D reality, we use 4D plus specific rooms with moving seats and air and giant screens to try to evoke small sensations, when the first movie ever was able to make people run out of the room. So I find it really, really important, because it shows that our brain, our perceptual system has been much used to deal with illusions, because this is an illusion. I mean, the train coming here, a movie is an illusion. There is nobody in the screen. We have been much more used to this, and so our brain has become less sensitive to impossible objects. So when you see an object like this, you feel, well, that's nice, it's nicely designed, but that's more or less what you feel, and you realize that it is impossible. But when you see this one, you really have this compelling thing. So we designed a little collection of objects like this. For example, this impossible cube here that you can see in 3D. And we carefully adjusted the lighting so that we made the illusion more compelling. You see, if this leg here, which is really behind, because of course how this is made, is like this, you have a real cube and you have a little opening here, which was very difficult to make at the exact dimension. And when you make pictures or when you view it, you have to be at the right distance and the right angle to make the illusion possible. But anyway, not only this, you also have to adjust, like if the leg here in the back remains dark, you don't see the illusion so well as when you light it, because there is always much more light in the front of the images than in the back. So you have to adjust these kind of things. And then you have to make sure that people access to this with only one eye, so that they have only one possible interpretation and they don't see the tricks. So we use again this kind of glasses by making a hole in the wall. And so we compared 5 possible illusions. This object here that has been designed by Yves, this Penrose triangle that we made real. You all have seen a real version of it already? And it's very simple to make. It's an object like this. And then I have never tried to do this online. Then you have to be something, yeah, more or less something like this. I'm not really well, but you can see the idea that if you see it properly, you can really make the impression that this is that this impossible triangle has been made real. Then there is the cube that I showed you before, and an object that is called the Blivet that you also saw earlier. So this is a drawn version, and this is a 3D version made by wood. And this is a filled space illusion, where usually the space in between these two bars looks larger than the space between these two bars, even though there is a ruler in between showing you that this is the same distance from here to here than from here to here. And it was kind of control experiment because you need more cognitive access to the stimuli than to the other ones. It's really striking at the first sight that this is impossible object. And then we also use as stimuli pictures of the same real object. And we presented subjects with these 15 stimuli randomly in a random order. And every time an object was presented, they were asked to rate how much they were disconcerted, how much they were surprised, and how much they were, this made them doubt about their perception, and so on. And what you find when you do this is, as one may expect after what everything I've said so far, is that people get much more surprised when they face the real object than when they see the drawing version of the cube. And even that the pictures tend to be in between these two lines. And this is true for surprise, and this is true. I began to copy this another parameter, surprise, disconcerting here, disconcertment. I don't know English, but the colors didn't go well, so I didn't put all of them. Anyway, you see exactly the same feature for all of them. And then at the end of the experiment, you show the three objects at the same time, three versions of the same object, drawing, picture, real. And you ask them which is the more compelling, and which is first, which is second, which is third. And then you see that there is simply, very clear result that everybody believes that they are more disconcerted and more surprised and feel more doubt when you see the real object than when they see the pictures or the drawing. So the conclusion from this story is that if you study the reaction of the perceptual system in front of impossible objects, it shows that 3D illusions are much more compelling than 2D illusions, and that they challenge perception more than pictures and drawing. So this is an argument to say that, okay, so now instead of using these illusions that are classical 2D illusions, we should really try to design 3D illusions that can be used and produce more compelling effects. So second study here is trying to use ambiguous objects. So you all know this kind of 2D ambiguous objects that can be a duck or a rabbit, and you can decide without changing place that this can be a rabbit or this can be a duck. This is one of the oldest ambiguous object design. But Sugihara, the Japanese mathematician that I was talking about earlier, designed these kind of objects. When you see he's presenting this object in front of a mirror. So you see this object made of two hexagons superimposed with three heads. And looking from the other side, you see half of an hexagon with only one head. This is really impossible to believe that the same object can be seen this way or this way, simply depending on the side you look at the object. And this is exactly what he made with the objects I was showing you earlier, that can look like a square or a circle, depending on the angle. This is also true for this little garage that you can see looks like a concave roof, but from the other perspective, will look as a convex proof. I have here as well. And in fact, it's flat. So if I present to you like blah, 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 let me see something like this, you may see it, yes, you may see it convex, and then I turn and you see it concave. So now what we do is that we will put this object in front of this kind of box here, which is simply a box made of wood. And we are going to put our objects inside, and then you have a little hole here, and you have a little hole on the other side. And we will have people looking at the same object from two different perspectives. This is our game. And when you put the object in the middle, people say on the one side, obviously this is a square, and from the other side, it is a circle. There's no doubt it is a circle. And even after having played myself with these objects for a long time, the simplicity of the object is such that there is no way you can discuss that this is a square or a circle, and putting yourself on one side, you see a square, and you really cannot even imagine that this may be a circle, even being used to the illusion, which is really, really strong. And I think the fact that this is touching into the most basic shape makes the effect even stronger than if you use very sophisticated image, like if you were using Escher's stairs or something like this, because there is lots of surrounding information. So in this experiment, we use a collection of such objects. That is, we have two arrows here, and one of the person is seeing them pointing in opposite direction, whereas from the opposite perspective, we see the two arrows pointing in the same direction. Then they press a button and the whole thing rotates, and then they switch their roles. So you perceive the rows in the same direction or opposite direction. There is the small car with the roof that you have seen. There is this object here that we first present without the light, and then we switch the light on, and it's already introduced some doubt. And then we switch off, and we have the people swap positions. And then this object as well that we constructed following the instructions of Sugihara. And we have control illusions, and we used a mini Ames room that we built in the same box like this. We use the Spather illusion. That's funny. I just said as if I were in Germany. Spather illusion. There is the Ames Sugihara object where you can have a bar going through this, and it goes like it seems like it's going like this. Or a proper Ames, rotating Ames window. So we try to match the effect of surprise and interaction and complexity and fun that people can have with these illusions as compared to these illusions. So the idea being to compare illusions where you can switch point of view, that is, at one stage you can really put yourself in the shoes of the other person. Whereas for this one, there is a lot of fun, you can enjoy and you can share with other people, but there is only one way to look at the object. There is not another perspective that allows you to see the world differently. So now, how are these objects going to affect the reactions of people doing this kind of task? So we have a list of questions that we ask from the subject. To what extent were you surprised by the illusions? Can you rate how puzzled you feel about these illusions? What was this? Well, this one was not interesting for here. It was more for us to know which box was more interesting and fun. And then we also rate perspective taking. Did the different way to see the objects, question the different way to see the things. How did this experience make you reflect about the possibility to have different points of view in a given situation? Do you perceive the other's point of view differently following this experience, blah, blah, blah. And so we find that after being exposed to these objects, which takes about 20 minutes to look at the 4 boxes and playing, we have the kind of scenario where students come by 2 and there are 1 on each side. And then after really defending each perception, in the end, they can never agree about what they see. I mean, we ask them to try to agree about what they see or to find a common agreement on what they see, but they cannot. And then finally they swap position and then they realize. So, and then we discuss about this. And then we see that in terms of surprise, they are much more surprised by the ambiguous objects than the real, usual illusions. And in terms of perspective taking, we also see that they are much more affected by the real objects, and changing the perspective, putting themselves into the shoes of others, is much more compelling in terms of perspective taking than the basic usual illusions. Not basic, quite sophisticated, but usual illusions that does not involve this kind of changing point of view and taking the place of the others. And this may actually be the first time when you play this game that you really can put yourself into somebody else's shoes. That is, you see the world this way, the other one sees this way, and then you discuss and you discuss. And so you take property you take ownership for the way you see the world. And then stage you go there and you, yeah, I can really see things like you. And I think we all would like once in our life be able to see the world through the eyes of another person, or to be really able to take another person's perspective. And usually it's not possible because the other person is a complex mixture of emotions, history, cognition, etc. So it will never be possible. But here, with such simple level experience of geometric shapes, it is possible to really put yourself in the other's shoe. Anyway, so what we see with this is that experiencing the perceptual effect of a change in spatial perspective is much more challenging perception, and is also thought-provoking, and we hope opening about the other's perspective. Now, if we try to target patients with this, so after having played with this quite a while with students and dissemination and experiments, we had the opportunity to discuss with a colleague who was very much interested in this. It was funny because this colleague of mine was coming from Canada after doing a postdoc in Canada. And in Canada, he came from, I think in Montreal, where they have a unit where to improve schizophrenia, they have decided that they should teach them to doubt. And this is how we came together and said, wow, let's try to do this. He was already convinced that doubt was useful for patients. And why do they use doubt for schizophrenic patients? For 2 reasons. One is that they have hallucinations. And if you begin to be able to doubt that this is what is really happening, and you become more aware that this may be your perception, your hallucination, your perception of the world kind of thing, then you are able to take distance from hallucinations and get protected. And the other reason is that they also tend to attribute causal relationships to events. That is, if something good happens, it is because of them. If something bad happens, it is because of the other one. And if something bad happens, the other one did it on purpose. Of course, if you break my glass or something, you must have done this on purpose. So they really attribute, they have a causal bias, what is called in neuropsychology, to attribute bad intentions to other people. And so for this reason as well, we try to introduce doubt in their way they perceive the stimuli. Anyway, this is how we came to do this experiment. And of course, schizophrenia patients are known to have problems in social interactions, both at every level, cognitive, spatial, or affective levels. With this causal attribution problem that they have at the cognitive level, and the deficit of theory of mind, that is deficit in attributing mental states to others. So we just basically train them with the same exact procedure, 20 minutes playing with 4 illusions, using only the illusions with involving the change in perspective. Of course, the schizophrenia patients, when they are tested for tolerance to ambiguity, they are questioned as to evaluate the tolerance to ambiguity. The test is called MAT. They are less tolerant to ambiguity than comfort people. And in terms of empathy, if you study the ratio between the empathic quotient and the systemizing quotient, which is done sometimes for this patient, you find that they are below 1 or around 1, whereas the control group is around 2, which is just a critical data. And this is the way we assess the thing with analogical scales. They just have to put a cross where they feel they should answer. We also evaluated in the same, doing something similar to early before. We collected a random collection of images of faces like this, and we tried to ask them, for example, what is the degree of amability? Amability, I don't know if amability exists in English, but kindness, maybe you can say, how kind do you think this person is? So not at all very kind. How much pride? Well, but I mean, orgueil in French is something pride, but with a connotation that is very negative. That something that is overwhelmingly proud or something like this. Anyway, so this is something
arrogant.
Yeah, something like arrogant, I guess. Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, we have also arrogant in French, but anyway, something like this. And so people have to also rate whether they see this person as arrogant, not arrogant, etc. To see whether doing this game will improve the way they would perceive the face of other people. And we have a game of perspective taking where they have to see a scene pretty much in the same way as the game I showed you before, which is the version previously published by Michelin and Fact, where they have to say whether the bottle is right to the person or right to the book, and the angle between the person and the scene is varied from, this is my point of view of the viewer, so it's very easy. And this is the opposite point of view, which is much more difficult. And so we do all this kind of tests before and after, and then we look at the result. So first of all, in terms of spatial perspective taking, this is the capacity of the people before playing the game and then after the game. And so if I have to say that the bottle is left to the person here, it takes a little bit longer than to say right here. And here, maybe not for doctors, medical doctors are used, or radiologists, etc. are used to have people in front of them and seeing the left and the right with us. But anyway, for this patient, we can see that this is improved. But unfortunately, the prediction was that we should improve them mostly for the complex task, which is for the 180-degree task, because playing with the game here and changing perspective is a way to have them taking the perspective of another person and taking the opposite perspective. And in fact, we found that they were mostly improved for the zero angle, which probably means that they have been trained to the task and they become better, but they did not really improve in terms of spatial perspective taking, which was very disappointing because this was what we really thought would happen. And if we look at the curves like this and move these points here in order to be able to draw a complete slope analysis like this, we see very slight tendency for the patients to show an improvement after the post-test, but this would not happen in the patient. So given the huge error bars, we couldn't distinguish the effect in normals and in patients. And the only thing that we could see is that in the schizophrenic patients, patients tended to always have a slope that was not larger after. That means they tended to be slightly below, or equal after than before. But anyway, no obvious gain, no significant gain in terms of perspective taking in these patients. We found also no effect in terms of better evaluating the faces in terms of gentleness or arrogantness, etc. And we were really surprised to see that the test that gave the best outcome was the FOPA recognition test. Do you know this test? Some of you or no, none? The FOPA recognition test is a test that is used in neuropsychology. And this is a bunch of small scenarios. For example, Jill has just moved into a new apartment. She went shopping and bought some new curtains for her bedroom. When she had just finished decorating the apartment, her best friend Lisa came over. And Jill gave her a tour of the apartment and asked, "How do you like my bedroom?" And Lisa answers, "These curtains are horrible." Lisa said, I bet you're going to set some new ones. So obviously there is a faux pas here. And the question is, did anyone say something they shouldn't have said or something awkward? And if yes, then there are numbers of other questions that are aimed to discriminate whether you have the capacity to take the other's perspective at the cognitive level, emotional level, etc. So who said something they shouldn't have said or something awkward? So who? Why shouldn't have this? Blah, blah, blah. Why do you think she said it? Did Lisa know who had bought the curtains? How do you think Jill felt? Anyway, so with these small stories, they are used a lot in psychiatry and in neurological rehabilitation as well. You are able to analyze the capacity of people to put themselves into the shoes of others. And after our 20 minutes of experiment, we saw that for this FOPA test, there is a huge improvement in the capacity of the schizophrenic patients to be able to detect that someone said something wrong. They gain 7.8 points on the scale. And this improvement seemed to be mostly related to the cognitive component, but not for the emotional component, which means they have realized something, but they are maybe not yet, at least, able to have consequences in the emotional level. And now we've just collected a new group of 50 patients who are psychotic patients, not schizophrenic patients. And we find the same results with a gain of 5 points instead of 7 points here. And this is really interesting because the best result so far in the field with schizophrenic patients was to improve them through social cognition and interaction training during 3 months, several times a week, to gain 0.7. So 3 months of training several times a week, you gain 0.7 points on this scale, whereas after 20 minutes of this visual-spatial interaction, you can get 5 or 7 points. I was really astonished by this result. And I related to the effect that is called bottom-up rehabilitation, that is you act on sensory motor levels. So you kind of don't address the issue that is problematic in the first place, but you do a detour and you go through a level that is more embodied of experience. So you can teach them that they should pay attention to the other one and give them examples, etc. This is only going through their mind. You don't talk to their sensory interaction. You don't talk to their relationship with the world. You don't talk about real interaction with the world. And if you do this, what we hope we are doing with these boxes, with these point of view boxes, then it seems that you produce this very nice gain for the patient. And this is a result for the control stories where there are no faux pas, and control stories where there is a completely flat story with have nothing to do with this, where you see no significant change as well. And then what we also were happy to see is that there was a correlation between the amount of surprise rating by the patient and the score that they showed in the test, like this. So, as a conclusion, if we use this kind of task, and not quite as much conflictual as this, trying to make it a bit more fun than conflictual, may give rise to better possibility to take into account the other's point of view, so develop perspective taking at the cognitive level at least. And we see this as a bottom-up effect that is using spatial perspective taking to act upon cognitive perspective taking. So using bypass and not to address directly the condition that is directly troubled by the disease. This is in line with our previous work in spatial neglect, for example. And currently, we are prolonging these studies with psychotic patients with a larger group of schizophrenic patients, mild brain injury patients, and mild stroke patients, that is patients in neurological rehabilitation, who also show severe problems of social interactions when they go back home after having recovered from their motor deficit. It is then gradually uncovered that they show deficits in social cognition. So a long history of illusions and the discomfiture of confidence of basic impossible 3D objects. Do they provide the optimal knock on the mind? That's my question. Maybe we can find something better, but that's so far much better than 2D objects, 2D scenes. And basic spatial perspective taking scenarios can be used as a bottom-up rehabilitation technique. And yeah, to be continued, of course.